Today I feel very honored that I have the opportunity to hear two distinguished climate change researchers at the Falling Walls 2019. On my right, we have Professor Antje Boetius. I hope I pronounced that right. She is a polar researcher and a director of the Alfred Wegener Institute for Polar and Marine Research here in Germany. And we have on my left Professor Dabo Guan, professor at Tsinghua University in China and environmental economist. So let me start with Professor Dabo Guan because I was already on my first question when Professor Antje came. So in your talk, you told us how a single person can make a change. You said we should maybe have less hamburgers, potentially shop less and buy fewer jeans. Clearly you feel that one person can make a difference. Professor Boetius, both of you may be familiar with a very young eco-activist, Greta Thunberg, who sailed across the ocean and she's making a statement. Some people have called her an eco warrior. Some people have said she deserves the Nobel Peace Prize, where others said she has an agenda. Do you have any thoughts on what she has done so far, on her role in climate change?
Yeah, I think everyone can be the hero or the warriors for the climate change battles, and everybody should be. I talk from the consumption side. We change our lifestyles. We change the more greener way to consume. We always have a choice, especially in the Western world. We always have a choice. The problem is whether you want to take the more greener choice you can do. But so if you do, you'll become a sustainable warriors or a hero to represent the climate change. In terms of buying less or especially not follow the current wrong way, a wrong definition of the fashion. What I really want to say here is, which I didn't have the time to speak on the stage, is that we need to break the wall between the sustainability and fashion. We need to break the wall between the sustainability and the lifestyles. Fashion currently is defined the wrong way. We need a new definition, a greener definition of fashion to make sustainability as fashion. Sustainability is fashion. Once this has happened, accepted by everybody in here, and then we are the heroes, we are the warriors, because yourself are gonna influence not only yourself, your families, your neighbors, and then finally to the whole communities to reduce emissions. Once we have a significant mass of the new fashion, sustainable kind of lifestyles, we will have a less. Well, we won't have the problem for the climate change anymore.
Thank you, Professor Guan. Professor Boetius, you are leading a mission with hundreds of scientists from 19 countries, if I'm not wrong. So clearly you know the role of a team. But what can one person do? What is the role of one?
Yeah, as Professor Guam already mentioned, we have to bring several parts of the system together. On the one hand, it is the cultural change of mind that you refer to, with setting the trend for sustainability, because without the will of the people, it's really hard to achieve a big transformation that we have to achieve. But it's not enough. So you can also calculate that the pure idea you can save the world by renouncement, by just no flying, no meat eating, it doesn't work. It takes too long. We have to respect the time it takes and the change that it needs to get to that future that we want. And it will not work without having technical solutions to the energy system. And that means that we have to be aware that we have a time span of less than 20 years for finding alternative solutions to the consumption, to the burning of fossil fuel, coal, oil and gas. And that needs a high-tech solution. It needs regional solutions and international cooperations. And currently many engineers work on the solution of hydrogen gas, gas-based solution that we can have with bio solutions together, that we do not get rid of the combustion principle, because it would again take far too long to do that, but to have basically power to gas, gas to X, gas to chemistry, to allow combustion as a circular economy.
Professor Boetius, I was very happy to see that there is an app that I can download to follow Mosaic's success, the expedition's success. I'm a science communicator. I'm very interested. How else can we support your mission? How else can all of us in this room contribute?
Right. So the one that has to do with your idea of cultural change, the one thing that we have to understand in all industrialized areas is to rethink our connection to nature and to the role that Earth and other non-human life has for us and has for everything on Earth. And so a rethinking of that connection. For example, when you're a kid, it's very natural to you to respect, first of all forms of life and your environment, and you're curious, you want to understand and connect. But later in life, we get rid of this connectivity, and it allows us to do things without really reconsidering the harm that we do. So we think that science and science in all disciplines can help reconnecting. And so in that one example of a mission to the North Pole, we are trying and working on the concept of reconnecting also to sea ice, to the North Pole, to the polar bears, to the life that is far from us, that with everything that we do will be changed. That's one other opportunity for science and culture to reconnect.
But more specifically, in the case of Polarstern, how can we, all of us, communicate or support Polarstern and your mission?
Well, you can talk about it. You can make other people aware that all countries together have this one big mission to find out what's the polar night, so absolute darkness, no photosynthesis possible, temperatures of minus 40 degrees, how life is possible and what it means to our planet. So understanding, getting informed and talking about it, and also discussing that all of our nations can do something large together, this I find fantastic, because we have otherwise the feeling that there is a lack of cooperation, but science is there for international cooperation, and it's important to discuss this point. That actually, besides all of the economical hassles, that between USA and China and Germany and others, we just solve together, and everyone has an important role in it. We solve these big questions that no one has solved before.
Okay, I'm just going to ask one more question to both our speakers, and then after that, I'll open it up to the floor. So please have your questions ready. 2 years ago, I was at the Falling Walls Berlin, and we had a very large slogan, at a big poster at the back, with a quote from Donald Trump, saying that climate change is a hoax. He said that it was a hoax invented by the Chinese, for the trade war with the US. So clearly, climate change has been, and global warming has been politicized greatly in the media.
Yeah.
So since we are at Falling Walls, how can we break down the wall of climate change denial?
Yeah.
I'm going to start with Professor Guan.
Okay.
He's the economist.
Yeah. I will let the science explanation is actually Professor Antje Boetius has already explained a little bit about the past trends and the observation from the air bubbles in the ice cores. And those science is there and is scientifically proved, and they just the politicians choose to pick whatever they do. So I think the Professor Boetius, they have a better to say there. But I want to say something else. If a science doesn't educate you, or you don't believe it, the consequence you must be respect. In the recent years or recent decades, we see much frequent climate extreme events or the disasters happened to China, to India, to Germany. A lot happen in the United States. We've seen the hurricanes hitting, sequencing hurricanes within several couple weeks, just hitting the east coast of America. This never happened in the history before, at least in the human history. And the current wildfire in California must give some lessons to the politicians what they are thinking. And if you don't act on the climate change mitigation, this is the consequence. You're going to suffer more and severe in the future. So I'm an economist. I do the calculations for what's the cost for that. So I'm not only costing for the physical damage, the direct damage for the physical assets, but also account for the indirect, the cascading effects through the supply chain. I can give you an example for the United States. The Hurricane Katrina, per unit of a direct physical assets, it would lead to 700%, so sevenfold indirect costs to the supply chain. That's why this is so hard. Right now, it's still under recovery for the Katrina, which happened in 2005. So this is not only kind of damage to the physical assets and the people society, but they all have a cascading effect through the supply chain, through the social network as well. So this is what I say. If the science doesn't teach you, then the consequences they must teach you.
That is very strong words. If the science doesn't teach you, the consequence. How about Professor Boetius? How do you feel? How can we break the walls of climate change?
Exactly the same. So the history of humanity and cultural change and large transformations teach us that it may take a while, but in the end, truth will win. And so the difference is society ready to recognize the truth and take the right choices to avoid suffering and to avoid extra-orbital costs. When you think about it, how long it took for the human society to understand that Earth is not flat, it took quite a while. Until today, we have a group of people that have a kind of a platform that still claims the Earth is flat and everything else is a hoax. So we cannot wait for people who believe whatever, because this question is not about believing, it's about understanding the truth. And those countries, those societies, those people who will understand it and use it to shape their future will be the winners. It is an evolutionary principle that we all know very well is helping not the deniers. It's actually costing them a lot eventually. For one thing, there will be the bad guys of history. In a few decades, we will look back and fingers will be pointed to the craziness of single people in governments who say that there has not been a global warming. So we don't have to focus all of our efforts on those deniers. We have to focus our efforts on a young generation that stands up and goes to the street and that actually needs support, because when I was a child, I was on the streets too. It was against the atomic bombs, the chemical weaponings of Earth for the destructive power that it had. And as a kid, I felt very unsafe and I was disappointed by the adults that they couldn't fix a better future for us kids. Luckily, we fixed it. So now it's time to look after the next generation of kids and fix the future.
Okay, I have a question. Igor, please.
Thank you. Igor Osipov, Digital Science UK. Question to Antje. First of all, very, very nice project, Mosaic project. Two questions. One related to Polar. Do you somehow bridge the gap with the indigenous people that live through the 6-month night in the high Arctic? And second, what is your view on the North Sea route that is being built now?
Yes, we do. So there is, while the Mosaic mission is dedicated to the open ocean, to the ocean where people don't live and have never done so, of course there is a big discussion of a fully inclusive terrestrial mosaic. And this is carried out, this is planned together also with indigenous people. We have a project ourselves in Canada where it's about the future of the melting permafrost and the change of coastal habitats. The Arctic Council has several working groups where we face with the 22 tribes that are living around the Arctic, where we are planning the interactive knowledge sharing. So for sure, for those places that are inhabited by people, there are big ideas for larger missions even that includes all kinds of knowledge that is needed. And the second one was the route, the North Sea route. Well, it's already used. We're already monitoring ship traffic through the Northern Sea, and it's increasing. So we have to, luckily the International Maritime Organization has put a polar code, very strict rules for how ships can access and use the Northern Sea route to save fuel. At the moment, the biggest users is tourism. And the worry that I have is out there in the Arctic Ocean, no harbors, no hospitals, there is no sea rescue in place. So it's quite a dangerous place to go. And before I think we could allow for much more sea traffic up there, we would have to have the infrastructure to rescue people and rescue the environment in case of environmental accidents.
We have a question.
Yeah.
Oh, sorry.
Okay. Thank you.
Just on the top is that I think from the economic activity in the polar circles, because of the climate change, the ice, the shipping time seasons become much longer. I really hope everybody, all the scientists joined me, or we work together to really count whether it's a good economically and environmentally is a good to allow the shippings across the polar. The reason for that is because the Arctic Sea right now, there's currently there's the pollutions or the emissions is only secondary. There is no direct source for the pollution. But then on the dirty, heavy fuel, fossils, ferries cross by, they will have a direct source to the area. They're gonna generate the black carbons. The black carbon will flow on the ice. They're gonna absorb the radiation and further maybe worsen the situation, the meltingness. But this is all my guess. Maybe something we could work together on see how they go.
Collaboration in the works. Karsten, please.
So, thank you. You said that we have to be a positive example of reducing carbon dioxide emissions in what we consume. And I have actually published a kind of suggestion for that, because Fridays for Future and all the other organizations demand that countries introduce a carbon dioxide tax. But on the other hand, countries do not want that because it will harm their export industries. So my suggestion is to tax the consumption rather than the production, and that's on Beyond Panic DE. Unfortunately, only in German so far. So, but what do you think of this approach as an economist?
Unfortunately, I have some different opinions on this. I see the lifestyles can't be changed or can't be manipulated by the government, people's life. And they took me a long time to see what is a way to do it, because you set a tax on fuel, on the fossil fuels and whatsoever on your consumptions. They sometimes have rebound effects. A lot of the time is on rebound effect, and the people don't like it. And usually it take a government, because it will lose votes for applying tax, etc. But what I see is a culture and social change. We need to be, it's education, and then it really is the education today, and what we hear today is really to make you positively to change your lifestyles and then we influence others. Most important, to influence our next generations. And they are the futures, and they are gonna see the consequence of the climate change. Very importantly, for the next generations in developing countries, because there's 70% of world population is in the developing countries, and how the next generation think is most very important. Unfortunately, the Chinese young generations, they are actually Starbucks, McDonald's, etc., etc. is not what I want to see. Including myself, I need to change as well.
Okay, but we have just asked our German government to increase the carbon taxes for the reason that we have evidence that this is the fastest, in our economical situation, the fastest response, the fastest saving of carbon is by taxes. Nothing faster than that.
There is a question. We'll let the lady go first. Barbara, please.
Thank you very much. What's keeping me awake is why is it that we are very collaborative species. However, in challenges that we need to address, there is a real lack of collaborations at a bigger scale. So I would like to learn from both of you, from the Mosaic project, what did you learn in the process of developing this collaborative system? What were the challenges and what you can share with others? How we can do that faster, bigger, and what others needs to learn from that? And also from you, Dabo, what is it that you see, maybe in China or other places? What are those emerging movements, citizen movements, that are taking that forward, from the ground up? Thank you.
Yeah, so for the mission, the biggest challenge was, of course, and that had not so much to do with the culture or with the nation, is to really have all instruments standardized so that for a year, when we need to observe seasonal change, that we could really put data together. And that's a missing issue in science, that we need for some observations, like annual, so long-term time series, that we need very precise measurements. And this whole work of bringing people together to execute one thing, that is that to reduce uncertainty, that was a huge effort. It took several years. That was taking the longest. Finding the money also took a long time. But having everyone understand, if you can have an instrument that is your own and you like it, and it has another uncertainty than the German one, that we cannot put the seasonal change appropriately together. That's something that science needs to be much better at. And it has to do with human understanding and with rules that we imply for a goal that everyone understands. And in that, of course, what do you have? You have communication. And that's the advantage of big missions. If you have one big mission, it's so easy to transport the goal. And that's how we think we'll manage the idea that those participating, that everyone will look back on them, even in 100 years. So that's why we use the Fram example. I forgot to say, on our app, every day you can read how Fridtjof Nansen taught 127 years ago and how we are thinking and deciding today. And to show the human principle that if you want one thing, and if you don't care from which nation, from which race it comes from, this big mission idea is changing a lot in science also. That was the trick, we think.
What I want to say is that there are many grand challenges. But often the grand challenges are separated by wars. And we sometimes take one grand challenge, and you can't have that. But many cases, those grand challenges are interrelated. We need to break war. We need a bigger hammer, much bigger hammer, to knock off one layer, but a multiple layer of wars. I give you an example. What is China is facing, including India and many developing countries are facing right now? There's, summarizedly, three major grand challenges they have to deal with together. First, poverty alleviation. Second, short-term environmental crisis. Third, long-term climate change issue. In the Western country, in Germany, in US, in Japan, whatsoever, the developed country has a chance to deal with those grand challenges one by one, step by step. Time pass. But those developing countries, China, India, they are facing all together simultaneously. They have to deal with simultaneously. So on one hand, increase their people's GDPs or poverty alleviation, and second, short-term alleviation, short-term environmental issues, and long-term climate change. This has to be done together. There's a fast, nexus or co-control or co-benefits of So this is basically the partnership. The number 17 of the Sustainable Development Goal, which is the last one, partnership for the goals. I'm a trade economist. I always use trade to answer some of the questions. I'm not saying all the questions. Cooperation between trading, between countries, including like a soft trade between you and me here, would be the way forward to break those walls. Not one wall, but several layers of walls.
A question to Dabo. What about the city or urban horticulture as a way to connect production and consumption in terms of psychological, mentally, lifestyle.
Right, yes. I sent you a paper we recently wrote last year, published in Science Advance the other day, particularly talking about city. Long story short is that cities, especially in the developing countries, we have rich cities, Shanghai, Beijing, or let's say Mumbai in India, but we have many less developed cities as well. Like 15, 20 years ago, I was sort of a young researcher at that time, and it was believed actually the industrializations can be jumped. Industrialization stages can be jumped. But today, I don't think the industrialization stages can be jumped. There's an example such as Singapore, Hong Kong, they actually jumped from pre-development stages to almost a mature economy. But most of the country in the world, they can't. They have to follow the industrialization stages that. So this is the differences in terms of the responsibility for different cities because they are at different development stages. But our current climate policy is all top down. We have a global target, 1.5 degree, 2 degree. Each countries have their INDC whatsoever. Then, usually it's a horizontal, which is down to the provincial and the city level. But this is not effective. I will say we use a cross-sourcing way, like cross-sourcing money, but cross-sourcing for emissions from city level. There, your own things, and you have your own comparative advantage. You know how to reduce your emissions. So I will say different. The cities at the different industrialization stages have different responsibilities. They know their own needs and they know where they can go for, not from the top-down approach.
Yeah, I just thought of the knowledge we got this morning, and I was still very impressed by the idea of grandmothers fixing things. And it's actually very true. I read a scientific paper from a scientist that deals with the future of consumption, and he has analyzed that across all cultures, we humans in our well-being are mostly defined by human interaction. So there is the famous French saying, I think, from Jean-Paul Sartre, l'enfer c'est l'autre. So you can be miserable or you can be very happy because of the interaction you have with other humans. So if it's not all about surviving in terms of having enough to eat, but if you are in a middle-income area where it's decisive how you decide on your future well-being, how we define it, decisive in terms of planetary boundaries, we have to fight back this knowledge of the analog interactions of being a team, being, as we say in German, a Bande. So having a friendly environment, this is where our effort needs to go. And that's what fixes well-being much more than the consumption of T-shirts and hamburgers, as you said before. But somehow, and there is the best movie on earth I can recommend to anyone who wonders about the future of consumption and the future of well-being. It's from Jim Jarmusch, the latest movie, where he discusses zombies and climate change. If you haven't seen it, go and see it and you'll understand the solution for our future.
Questions from the audience? Well, in that case, I'm going to use this opportunity to ask my own questions. Dabo, you mentioned Singapore, of course. I'm from Singapore, and Singapore is taking climate change very seriously. In the National Day rally in August this year, our Prime Minister probably spoke about climate change for the most part of his talk. That was surprising. And Singapore has committed $1 billion to fight climate change, including having all houses built 2.2 meters above sea level as a start. They're projecting like decades ahead. But I believe that's not enough because we can build as many walls as we want, raise our sea level as high as we can. But there will be a new problem in the future. And as an environmental economist, help me understand. We will see climate change refugees in the future. As things get very bad in one place, surely they're going to move around and then we'll see a new kind of unrest. Have you thought about that in your projections? The thought of climate change refugees?
To be honest, I'm very much economics and refugees. I usually quantify things, but I have one thing that I haven't done is migrations forced by climate change. This is worth to do, and I know there's quite a number of anthropologists and people working with the climate scientists trying to understand this. But what I want to say here is you see all the IPCC report, especially the 1.5 degrees C special report. We already compared to the pre-industrialization stage, we are already 1 degree above. And we see many little islands lost in there. And we already see many refugees, sort of not a big scale yet, but lots of refugees are there. So climate is definitely a great challenge in the future, and the people who forced to move, and the quantity they're going to be significant. I work with many climate scientists. They predict under different trajectories and whatever, and many places near the sea, and including quite a big part of the Shanghai regions in China, they're going to undertake it in the water. And they will have lots of the costs economically, and I pursue there's a huge amount of refugees would occur.
I mean, Indonesia has, Jakarta is the capital city, and they are already trying to find a new capital city because Jakarta is going to be underwater completely by 2050. That's crazy. That's crazy. The entire capital is moving.
We did a calculation which is not published yet. So the future climate change, the sea level rise under RCP 4 and 4.5 scenarios, is quite a conservative kind of emission increasing trajectory in the IPCC things. Under that, the total economic costs for losing land or moving the industry. So it's basically all the shiftings would cost 30% of the Chinese annual economy, if something big happened, the sea level rise in the future. So the economic cost will be huge. Socially, I'm pretty sure it's going to be huge, but I will leave it to the social scientists to answer.
Points to that?
So I think what we all know is that beyond the mere Earth system tipping points, there is of course social tipping points, and the question of migration is one. So just when you think about how would it feel if someone comes to you and says in 1 year you have to pack everything up and move to another place, and we will have some homes for you and you will have to go there, and that's where your new life is. That is the most destructive news you can have to people, and it's already happening, and that's why we know that for the mixture of both the climate responses, the climate adaptation and poverty, and usually it comes together, the tipping point is large-scale migrations that no one knows how to deal with, even on a small scale not, and that is unpredictable. It's simply not, we cannot compute that in our ideas of what will happen in the future. That's why the railguard that we have to not let warming pass the 2-degree goal, that's where all the effort needs to go, because after that it's just a very unstable, unpredictable system, and mostly because of us humans. That's important to understand. Okay.
I think the solution, from the technology perspective, there will be the AI people and the robotics people who are going to help us to answer this.
Questions from the audience? Anyone has questions? Well, we'll just take a couple more, and then I will ask 1 or 2 more questions, and then after that, if there are no further questions, we will close the panel. I guess one question that I have is, many years ago in Singapore, I'm from Singapore, by the way, no high-end restaurant would accept the impossible meats, the plant-based burgers. Because they said they will not allow that burger, the meat into their kitchens. It was not real beef. And then it became fashionable after Beyond Meats, Memphis Meats, Impossible Meats came into the picture, and they made it cool. And that struck an entire revolution. and now it's everyone is taking them, and they proudly have signs outside the restaurants that say "Impossible Burger served here," Beyond Burger served here. So that seems like a kind of a viral movement of sort. Can we do the same with fashion? What do you think about it, Dabo?
Well, I think you girls would know this better because you know the fashion better. I'm just presenting. I know a little bit, mostly heard from my wife, basically. So I don't know. Well, I think it's a basic research needs to be done for the culture meat, basically. Or many people say like not real meat, through the life cycle assessment perspective. We don't. This certainly will be reduced, but how much precisely we need to understand how to produce it, and the whole process of transportations and then the people consumption. They require the whole life cycle analysis to verify the actual embodied emission in that meat. So this I don't know the figures. Until then, I would say we are deserving a decent living standard. To have a hamburger once in a while is not a problem. It's not like I have it many times per week or something. It's just become addiction is a problem. So once in a while it's not an issue. We come to the earth. We have a decent living standard, as this is a cost to the environment. This is a carbon footprint associated with that. But the choice is when we have a choice, we can choose to a greener way. We can reduce what we can. The rest we can't reduce, and we can offset, but somehow, especially for the poor population in India and China. They don't have the capacities or affordability to offset their emissions or to care about their carbon footprint too much right now because they are barely struggling with livings. There's a basic living rights there, and there's a decent living standard there. Beyond the decent is overconsumption, and what's that? The space left is what we need to reduce. It's not necessary to compromise the quality of life or compromise the rights of the living.
Well, thank you, Professor Dabo Guan. Thank you, Professor Antje Boetius. Have a wonderful Falling Walls conference. My name is Juliana Chan. Thank you.